Fulcomer. So I will turn it over to Deacon Fulcomer Leonard.
Good evening. So we will begin our devotions with a reading from the Gospel of Mark, the first chapter. As Jesus passed along the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. And Jesus said to them, "Follow me, and I will make you fish for people." And immediately they left their nets and followed him. As he went a little farther, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, who were in their boat mending their nets. Immediately he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with the hired men and followed him. Here ends the reading. As we begin our time together in assembly under the theme of Journey with Jesus, what better place to start than when Jesus invites the first people to journey with him? Now imagine being at work one day when a strange man strolls by and invites you to follow him and fish for people. Now imagine that you actually say yes, drop everything and go. Now some of you know that I actually work with my father, much like James and John, except I'm technically his boss, but that's not important. I can only begin to imagine a scenario like this. If I just said, "Hey Dad, following this stranger, see you when I see you," it goes against all of my instincts, and I can't imagine it would go over well with my dad either. Burdening my father with my responsibilities in addition to his own, letting alone the putting aside of family bonds. It makes zero sense. Yet Mark tells us that this is exactly what happens. Jesus walks along the shore and extends the simple invitation to come and follow him, to join in his mission to fish for people. First, Simon and Andrew, quickly followed by James and John, drop their nets, leave their family and co-workers, and go. The grace and the power of Jesus' inviting call was so great that walking away from their present duties and responsibilities, leaving their homes, their vocations, and their families was worth it. When have you heard Jesus calling you? Perhaps it was a call to enter seminary or ministry, rostered ministry, lead a congregation, take a new job, or serve as a lay leader in your congregation. Perhaps it was even to serve as a delegate of your congregation to this very assembly. Were there times that Jesus called you into something new that made those around you scratch their heads, maybe even question your seemingly senseless choices? Has Jesus ever asked you to take a leap of faith? As the old hymn goes, Jesus calls us over all of the noise and distraction in our times of tumult and sorrow, and our times of ease and joy, saying simply, "Follow me." Cecil Alexander's hymn closes with this prayer: Jesus calls us. By your mercy, Savior, may we hear your call. Give our hearts to your obedience, serve and love you best of all. Let us pray. Christ Jesus, send your Holy Spirit to help us hear your voice, calling us into your mission, even when it seems like a crazy choice. Guide us on our journey with you, especially as we enter into our Synod Assembly, in which we are entrusted to make decisions as delegates for your people. May we be renewed in our callings and reinvigorated to serve you. We pray all these things through your most holy name. And all God's people said, amen.
Let us open the assembly. Where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, says the Lord,
I am there among them.
Live a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace.
Let us pursue what makes for justice and peace, for mutual upbuilding.
Lord, hear my prayer.
And let my cry come before you,
The Lord be with you.
and also with you.
Let us pray. All-powerful God, in Jesus Christ, you turn death into life and defeat into victory. Increase our faith and trust in our Savior, that we may triumph over all evil in the strength of the same Jesus Christ, our Savior and Lord. Amen.
Amen.
Almighty Creator and ever-living God, we worship your glory. Eternal 3 in 1, we praise your power, majestic 1 in 3. Keep us steadfast in this faith. Defend us in all adversity, and bring us at last into your presence, where you live in endless joy and love. Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, now and forever. Amen. Let us bless the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
The Lord Almighty order our days and our deeds in his peace.
Amen.
I declare this assembly to be in session in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Well, welcome to Synod Assembly, and we're going to get started. I'm just going to begin our assembly with a brief presentation. So grace and peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And we begin with a reading from Luke's Gospel from the Peterson translation, The Message. That same day, 2 of them were walking to a village in Emmaus, about 7 miles out of Jerusalem. They were in deep conversation, going over all the things that had happened. And in the middle of their talk and questions, Jesus came up and walked along with them. But they were not able to recognize who he was. And he asked, "What is this that you're discussing so intently as you walk along?" They just stood there, long-faced, like they had lost their best friend. And then one of them, his name was Cleopas, said, "Are you the only one in Jerusalem who hasn't heard what's happened during the last few days?" And he said, "What has happened?" And they said, "The things that happened to Jesus the Nazarene. He was a man of God, a prophet, dynamic in work and word, blessed by both God and all the people. Then our high priests and leaders betrayed him and got him sentenced to death and crucified him. And we had our hopes up that he was the one about to deliver Israel. And now it's the 3rd day since it happened. But now some of our women have completely confused us. Early this morning, they were at the tomb and couldn't find his body. They came back with a story that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Some of our friends went off to the tomb to check and found it empty, just as the women said, but they didn't see Jesus." Then he said to them, "So thick-headed and slow-hearted, why can't you simply believe all the prophets said? Don't you see that these things had to happen that the Messiah had to suffer and only then enter his glory? And he started at the beginning with the books of Moses and went through all the prophets, pointing out everything in the scriptures that referred to him. And they came to the edge of the village where they were headed, and he acted as if he were going on, but they pressed him. Stay and have supper with us. It is nearly evening. The day is done. So he went with them, and here's what happened. He sat down at the table with them, and taking the bread, he blessed and broke it and gave it to them. At that moment, open-eyed, wide-eyed, they recognized him. And then he disappeared. Back and forth they talked. Didn't we feel like we were on fire as he conversed with us on the road, as he opened up the scriptures for us? They didn't waste a minute. They were up and on their way back to Jerusalem. They found the 11 and their friends gathered together, talking away. It's really happened. The master has been raised up. Simon saw him. Then the two went over everything that had happened on the road and how they recognized him when he broke the bread. Here ends the reading. Our assembly theme is Journey with Jesus. And this story is a story of journeying with Jesus. And there is such richness in this story. The part I particularly love is the disciples who knew Jesus well did not recognize his presence. Later, they realize in the blessing and the breaking of the bread, that same action that he did in feeding the 5,000 and in the Last Supper with the disciples. Jesus walked with them on their journey, but they did not perceive him. I think as people of faith, we can remember those kinds of times in our own lives when we were journeying with Jesus, but not perceiving. At times there could be stress or even trauma in our lives, and we wondered where Jesus was. And yet later we realized that Jesus was right there with us. We as a church, as a synod, each of us and our congregations are on a journey that is shaping our faith and the future of our life together as the church. And I do love this metaphor of journey because it creates particular images for us. One of the things about journeys that is most important in a journey is the journey itself, rather than the destination. The disciples were on their way to Emmaus, but that's not the significant part of the story. It's the journey. We often speak about changes that are occurring in the church. Pastor Chris Sear on Edification Day in May talked about changes in the church. And he talked about that the church is not the church of the 50s and 60s, nor will it ever be. He shared stories back from 1850 and 1904, where the newspapers lamented the people that were drifting away from church as attendance in churches dropped. You see, we have been on this journey before, and the 1950s and the 1960s were an anomaly, an unusual time in the church that will not be repeated. So often when I visit churches and congregations on a Sunday morning, they'll ask what the church of the future looks like. And they're often nostalgic for the church, generally nostalgic for the time when they were a young person in the church. And as someone once said, nostalgia is the file that removes the rough edges from the good old days. Because the truth is, the good old days weren't necessarily so good for everyone. And we're not going back, but we are journeying forward. We do not know, nor can we know, the exact destination that we're headed. But the joy is in the journey, exploring new possibilities. As we heard from Pastor Priscilla Paris Austin on Edification Day, stories in her life of encountering Jesus in new and different and in innovative ways to be the church. Pastor Priscilla talked about encountering the living Christ when not expecting it, in working with people with special needs, opening the church to a community in new ways. I was recently reunited with people from a ministry that we began at St. John Lutheran Church in Littlestown. The ministry was called the Miracle Workers. It was a group of Special Olympians who helped develop a ministry in my time in Littlestown. That group was recently together leading worship at St. James in Gettysburg, and I had the opportunity to be present with them. These are people with whom I had the joy of expanding faith. I presided at their weddings, and here it was 10 years later to see their leadership in the church and to be warmly welcomed by them. Amanda Baer, one of these folks, in her message to the congregation said, "We are not people with special needs. We are people with special abilities." A journey that we began together has continued throughout the years with the presence of Jesus walking beside them, learning to walk with Jesus even when they and I was not fully aware of Christ's presence. Journeys change us. It's one of the joys and learnings that I've had as bishop. In my trip to Tanzania, opened my eyes to how the gospel is changing the lives of people, seeing the growth in the church. I remember when one of the deans in the conferences that I was meeting at said, "Bishop, we are a small diocese and just 80 congregations, but we're starting 10 new congregations this year. How many new congregations are you starting?" He wasn't trying to put me on the spot. He simply could not imagine a church that was not opening new congregations. It said so much about where their focus was as a church and how we have so much to learn from our siblings in the Southern hemispheres, where the church is exploding with growth. In Tanzania, they only have 18% of the population that we have in the United States, and yet they have twice as many Lutherans there. It is the nature of journeys to change who we are and the way we see the world. Our global companions change us when we have the opportunity to walk with them. One of the other joys of journeying is the companions with which we walk. The two disciples on the road to Emmaus were sharing their experiences from Jerusalem. We too have the joy of companionship on our journeys together. We're part of congregations, but also as a synod, we have one another, that we're walking together, that we can learn and cooperate with one another on our journey. It's one of the hallmarks of being the synod is our cooperation together. Whether it's in congregational redevelopment groups and cohorts, working together to find new ways to do ministry, or whether it's in youth ministry with our confirmation camps or youth ministry events, or ways in which our congregations are sharing resources. And we work together to feed the hungry, whether it's at food pantries or shared ministries, including food packing events. The list of ways that we walk together is endless. And the joy of the gospel is the relationships that we develop with those around us. And when you think about your faith journey, don't you think about the people who had an influence on you at your time in development of faith? Whether that was your parents or a pastor or a deacon or a teacher, all of these kind of people shape us in our faith journey. And we've been acutely aware of the importance of relationships in the last 2 years, and our strong desire to be back together in worship. These relationships were suddenly disrupted by the pandemic. And in that, we realized the importance of the relationships. In breaking bread, in being in relationship, we realized how much it is that we need one another. And I have been so grateful over the last several months to be back together in the congregations. And I long for us to be back together in Synod Assembly, as opposed to be standing here in front of this camera. We do not journey alone. The other things that journeys demonstrate is that we need to be able to travel light. You see, we don't ever set out on a journey and pack our entire house into a suitcase and take all of our possessions with us. I was speaking this week with Pastor Martini, and she reminded me about people who hike the length of the Appalachian Trail. And they start out with a backpack, and they have something for every eventuality, every kind of weather, every kind of situation. And by the first day on the trail, they are jettisoning as much as they can because they realize they can't possibly walk all the way from Georgia to Maine carrying all that stuff. As we journey with Jesus, we need to think about what it is that we will take along and what will weigh us down. There are treasures in our Lutheran heritage that define who we are as followers of Christ, such as our clear confessional documents. But as we pack for our journey, we need to consider what is at the core of who we are and what we've been carrying along that is not needed for the mission to which God is calling us now. The last delight for me in journeying is that we experience unexpected hospitality. How often when we are on the road, we are helped by someone unexpectedly, surprised by hospitality of a stranger. My trips throughout the world have always proven to be opportunities to experience hospitality. Last year in Bethlehem, Bishop Azar of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in Jordan and the Holy Land invited Connie and I to feast at his home when he heard we were in the country, and it was a magnificent meal. Throughout the Holy Land, Palestinian Christians offered incredible hospitality every step of the journey where we walked, where Jesus walked. As we move forward as a church, we must be open to the gifts and treasures that God will provide through the grace of others. Partnerships with other organizations and churches in our community, ecumenical partners, will strengthen us on our journey. Partnerships such as those that our congregations have with New Hope Ministry in working to feed people, or the Charles Bruce Foundation and the work that we are doing with them on homelessness are examples of how reaching beyond the walls of our church will help us to find new resources and companions to reach out into the community. The journey we are on as a church, a journey of faith, will be a time to experience the joy of Christ's presence if we do not worry about the destination, but enjoy the journey and allow this time to open us to be changed and to recognize the importance of the companions that we will have along the way, to travel lightly and not be burdened by things that are not essential, and to realize that we will experience the unexpected gifts of hospitality and grace. That's what it means to journey with Jesus. And through it all, we know that Christ is with us, even when we do not perceive Jesus' presence. In our journey as a synod, we know that we feed others as we have been fed by Christ, that we as a church know that this church is Christ's church, and there is a place for all here. Now, in the past year, the offices of our synod, in conjunction with the mission committee and the synod council and the staff, have worked to shape our mission around 6 key priorities. The first is developing leaders, working to find ways to grow leaders in our church, particularly in the first third of their lives, working with our young people in our camps, in youth ministry programs, and then certainly working with people who feel called to ministry, our seminarians. Through our candidacy committee, we journey and walk with our candidates, preparing them for vocation in the church. And we also work to find continuing education experiences for our rostered leaders and our lay leaders. And we continue to work to bring leaders to our congregations through the call process. In addition, we work on fostering spiritual wellness, and it has been a challenging time in the last 2 years for all of us. This pandemic has been a difficult time, and so we turn to our faith for strength and for hope. So we've offered respite retreats for rostered leaders. We've had cohort grants for groups of clergy to gather together, and we have emphasized Bible study and soul care to really strengthen the spirit of our synod. We also have stressed interacting authentically, really living into who we say we are as we go out into the community, reaching out and welcoming beyond our congregations, starting new missions, finding new ways to reach out. And tomorrow we'll get to see some video of some of our congregations and the ways that they are present in our communities. We also strive to care for our congregations. And this is where our ministry happens, on the ground in our congregations. And it is about the relationships that we have in our congregations that really strengthen the spirit of our church. When I went to Edification Day this month, I went to the forum that Charlie Roberts did on youth ministry. And he talked about 3 key things that are important to do with youth, but I think they're important in all of our relationships. He said it is really important for youth to be seen, that they are recognized in the congregation, that we realize they are there, that we call on them for their gifts. He said the second was a really simple thing, to know their names. Each person's name is a gift to them. And when you know their name, it has real power to build relationship. And finally, to know people well enough to know what's going on in their lives, the lives of our young people, and the lives of people in our congregations. We work together as a synod to strengthen all of these ways that we relate together in congregations. And it includes the call processes, coaching, mission development, stewardship, and generosity. All of these are ways that we work together to nurture and strengthen and care for our congregations. We're also working to grow our justice outreach ministries. A core to our understanding of who we are as a synod is that we developed a welcome statement in 2016, welcoming all to our church. And so we're using a group of task force to address issues that really isolate people in our society so that they know they are welcome in our church. And we're dealing with task force around hunger and poverty, racial justice, people who are differently abled, the LGBTQIA, caring for immigrants, and the homeless. All of these people need our advocacy that they receive justice and treatment in our society and a welcome in our churches. And finally, we are working to build global relationships. We have had a long-standing relationship with the Kandy Diocese in Tanzania. It has been a great interchange between us and sharing in ways. And in addition, in the last several years, we have called Jennifer and David Hope Tringali as missionaries for this synod to work in Guatemala. And a number of our congregations have connected with them and traveled to Guatemala and to help and with Tree for Hope, a school for girls that would otherwise not be educated in that environment. It is teaching us about our Southern partners and a better understanding of why people would want to immigrate and risk their lives to come north to this country. And this is an opportunity for us to really grow and understand those relationships. The mission of the synod is centered on those priorities. And this is Christ's church. And there is a place for each of us in Christ's church. And we are on a surprising and wonderful journey together. And we are graced that Jesus is walking with us. Thanks be to God. Now we're going to get to some more routine work of the synod, and we're going to do that by, I'm going to call on Pastor Dana Block Hansen, and she is going to guide us as we prepare to use the voting app so that we can begin the voting process. So I'm going to turn this over to Dana, and please make sure you have your app ready. And before I do that, I have failed to do two things. So we'll just do those real quick. One is that I want to introduce the Reverend Thomas McKee. He is our parliamentarian for this assembly. He is former synod secretary, and he is a member of St. Paul's Lutheran Church in York. I also, and you have already seen, but I just want to introduce the chaplain for our assembly, Deacon Megan Folkemer Leonard. Deacon Folkemer Leonard is an ordained minister of word and service rostered in our synod. She graduated from the United Lutheran Seminary in Gettysburg in 2021 with a Master of Arts in Ministry Leadership degree. And Deacon Margaret is a youth ministry certification person from the Lutheran Seminary at Gettysburg. And she serves as deacon, called to a position of music, arts, and community engagement at St. Matthew Lutheran Church in York. And now I am going to turn it over to Pastor Dana Block Hansen.
Hello. So we will be going over the process for voting. So make sure you have your other device handy and have the VBox app downloaded. In the chat, you can see the session ID number that you will need to put into your app. So that is located in the chat. And so what will happen is we will share our screen. You'll be able to see on your device what we are voting on, and then you'll be able to make your selections. And the bishop will be reading the different votes for you.
So you should have your app open at this point in time, and you should see a question there. Are you going on summer or vacation this summer? And you can select yes or no. And once you select, it should say vote received. And if you want to change your mind, then you can do that. So all of you should be able to vote at this time, and there is 316 people in the meeting, so I'm thinking we're going to get that many votes. And we're just waiting for that. So, you know, I want to say that when I used to go to the gas station, air was free, and now you have to pay. And do you know what that's called? That's called inflation. Okay, the poll was closed, and now you have a second poll open. This is a multiple choice. Instead of 2, you can pick up to 2 choices and press send. What's your favorite summer food? Hot dogs, hamburgers, ice cream, and watermelon. So please choose 2, not 4. And when you press send, then you'll see it says vote received. And if you suddenly have a hankering for a hot dog and didn't put that down, you can clear, go back, put 2 in, and then hit send again. And you can do that until the poll closes. Poll has closed. And the next question is, have you attended Synod Assembly before this year? And if you're having trouble with your technology, you can certainly drop a note in the chat or give a call to the Synod office number, which is 717-652-1852, and the tech team can help you. I have operators standing by. And that poll is still open. Oh, they just closed it. Now we're going to move on to the certification of voting members. This is an important part, so we're live here. And what we're going to do here is determine whether or not we have a quorum. And I'm going to call on the Reverend Beth Schlegel, Synod Secretary, to report on registration.
Bishop, there are 426 persons certified as registered voting members of the 2022 Synod Assembly. Of these, 158 are active rostered ministers, 37 are retired rostered ministers, 22 are interim ministers, and 5 are rostered ministers on leave from call, for a total of 222 ordained ministers. 195 are lay voting members from congregations. There are 7 lay Synod Council members and 2 lay Synod officers, for a total of 204 lay voting members. In addition, there are 9 seminarians, 6 Synod staff members, 2 agency spokespersons, 1 lay committee volunteer, and the church-wide representative who are also registered, bringing the total registration to 445. There are 426 certified as voting members of the 2022 Synod Assembly. Needed for quorum are 213. So if we do the poll now, we can determine if there is a quorum present.
So you should have on your VVOX voting device a poll that asks you whether you're an active ordained pastor, active ordained deacon, retired ordained pastor, retired ordained deacon, a lay voting member from a congregation, or a lay voting member from the Synod Council or Synod officer. So if you would please indicate and vote on that, it will give us a count of how many people are present. And once we have that count, we'll determine if we have a quorum. There was a man who walked into a magic forest and he tries to cut down a talking tree. And the tree says, "You can't cut me down. I am a talking tree." And the man responds, "You may be a talking tree, but you will die a log." It just doesn't work the same without the people. It appears that the poll is closed. Do we have a quorum?
All right, we have, Reverend Bishop, we have 107 active ordained pastors, 11 ordained deacons, 22 retired ordained pastors, 2 retired ordained deacons, 145 lay voting members in congregations, and 10 lay staff, Synod Council, or lay Synod officers, for a total of 297 voting members participating.
Well, then I announce that there is a quorum and we can conduct business. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I would say that you need to pay attention to kind of the chat, and please know that if you want to speak during any of the business that we're working on, you may use the raise your hand function to get our attention, and you would want to chat to the moderator and tell them your name and congregation, and then we'll be able to call on you. So at this moment, I'm going to ask to go back to Secretary Schlegel, who is going to present the minutes of the 2021 Synod Assembly.
Synod Council has reviewed and approved the minutes of the 2021 Synod Assembly, and through the Bishop and Secretary certified these minutes as the official protocol of that assembly. 2 copies of the 2021 minutes book have been deposited in the Region 8 archives as a permanent record of that assembly.
All right, thank you for that report. We will now move to the report of the Synod Council, and I'm going to call upon Vice President Jennifer Lau to present this report. Jennifer is a member of Zion Lutheran Church in York.
Thank you, Bishop. Our first order of business and recommendations from Synod Council can be found on page 101 in the Bulletin of Reports, the proposed agenda, which is on pages 102 to 103. I move that recommendation number 1, the proposed agenda for the 2022 Synod Assembly, be adopted.
This requires no second because it comes from the Synod Council. And at this moment, we are open if anyone would like to discuss or amend the Assembly's agenda. If you would want to do that, you would want to use your raise the hand function, which you'll find at the bottom of your screen and under reactions. And then you would send a note to the moderator. So you would just go ahead and chat the moderator and tell them if you would want to make a change to the agenda. When we vote for this, it will require a 2/3 vote. So it's a super majority to vote on this. I'm checking with the moderator to see if people are rushing to their chat. Anyone raising their hand? We have some movement. Excellent. The system is working. Mr. Moderator, do we have 3 minutes up? Okay. I can't see them. You can tell me who they are. All right, I will call on Cindy Brookhart. Can we bring her up on the screen? Can I get Cindy Brookhart on the screen? Cindy,
We will need Cindy to turn on her video and unmute.
Cindy, if you could turn on your video and unmute, there should be icons in your bottom left-hand corner where you can do that. Cindy, are you there? All right.
I apologize.
Okay, Cindy, I gotcha.
I apologize, just total technical difficulties. We just logged on late and we're being very, very stupid here. So I did not mean to, I apologize, just ignore me.
Cindy, I can do that. I will go next to Keith Smith. Keith, if you would unmute and turn on your camera, we could. Nope, Keith is not going to do that. Okay, it appears like we're kind of learning the ropes of this, and so several people raised their hand just for the sport of it, maybe. I don't think there's actually anyone that wants to change the agenda. So I'm going to move to voting on the agenda. Again, this is going to be a 2/3 vote. And I'm going to ask the folks in the voting area to turn on the poll for the recommendation number 1. So you should see on your device right now in front of you, recommendation number 1. Yes, no, or abstain. Please vote now. Can we close that vote? Okay, I have the results. 294 yes to approve the agenda and 1 no. So we have 2/3 majority on that vote. And so we will now move on to recommendation number 2. Jennifer.
Thank you. I move that we adopt recommendation number 2, which is found on page 101 in the Bulletin of Reports, the proposed rules on page 103 to 106.
So you have the proposed rules for the procedure.
Okay, they're there. And we recommend that the proposed rules of procedure for the 2022 Synod Assembly be adopted.
This requires no second because it comes from the Synod Council. And we will ask, are there anyone that wants to speak to the rules? If you do, raise your hand and send your note or your name to the moderator. So you can chat the moderator if you want to do that. I'm not sensing that the rules are going to be very controversial. So I'm going to ask the voting folks to open the poll for the rules of procedure. You have that now in front of you. The poll is open. Recommendation number 2, select either yes, no, or abstain. Again, I would say if you want to speak in the assembly, you need to use the raise hand function. You'll find that under the reactions underneath in your Zoom. Once you raise your hand in Zoom, you'll need to speak by turning on your microphone and your camera. And the moderator will want you to put in the chat function who you are and whether or not you are for or against the motion that we're talking about. That way we can alternate between for and against. And I'm going to ask that we close the poll on recommendation number 2. Thank you. And very shortly, I'll get the results of that. $287 yes, 1 no, and 3 abstained. So it is passed with a 2/3 majority. The rules are adopted. We're getting this down. So anyway, I would also at this time like to thank Kathy Kuehl and the members of the Assembly Planning Committee for their fine work. If you're interested in the names of all the folks on the Assembly Planning Committee, you'll find that in the who's who of the Assembly. At this point, I want to introduce some guests to the Assembly. I would like to introduce the Reverend Jeffrey Compton. He's a member of St. Michael Lutheran Church in Harrisburg and is the necrologist for our Lower Susquehanna Synod. He wrote the necrologies for each of the rostered ministers who died since the last Synod Assembly. And those who died since the 2021 Assembly will be remembered in the Assembly during worship. Noah Rue is the ELCA Church Council representative to the Synod and is with us. And the Reverend Dr. Roger Willer, the Director of Theological Ethics in the Office of the Presiding Bishop. And he will present the church-wide report in just a few moments. We have with us the Reverend Guy S. Edmiston, Bishop Emeritus of the Lower Susquehanna Synod. And we have the Reverend Carol Hendricks, retired Bishop of the Lower Susquehanna Synod. And the other Bishop of the Lower Susquehanna Synod, B. Penrose Hoover, is not with us this evening. So at this moment, I'm going to move to the report of the church-wide representative, and I'd like to introduce more fully the Reverend Dr. Roger Willer. The Reverend Dr. Roger Willer is the Director for Theological Ethics in the Office of the Presiding Bishop. Theological Ethics had its lead responsibility for helping our church write its social teaching documents and for fostering moral deliberation. In the latter role, he serves as the publisher for the Journal of Lutheran Ethics, is a graduate of Wittenberg University and the Lutheran School of Theology at Chicago. Pastor Willer has served in inner city and suburban congregations in Cleveland, earned his PhD at the University of Chicago, and that has brought him to this intersection of theology, science, and ethics. And I have had the pleasure of working with Dr. Willer on the corporate social responsibility group for the ELCA, where we work with the church's social statements to really look at how we relate to corporations and to hold them accountable for social policy. So I am going to welcome Dr. Willer and allow him to begin to present on behalf of the ELCA for our assembly. Dr. Willer, welcome. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Bishop Dunlop, and thank you for the kind introduction. And may I wish grace and peace in the risen Christ this evening to you and to all of God's people gathered virtually in assembly in the lower Susquehanna Synod. I'm honored to be with you as the churchwide rep, and though virtual, delighted to greet colleagues I've worked with over the years. Your theme of Journey with Jesus really resonates as I share this report from the ELCA Churchwide Office, and especially because in many ways I represent the host of companions walking as partners in this journey with Jesus, with you in this very connectional church of which we are a part. I'm going to share my screen for the PowerPoint here. Make sure I get the right one because I have been known to get the wrong one and show the background of my family that I have. Let's see. There we go. I assume since I'm not seeing anybody's hands that you see the first slide. Great. Okay. Well, I was reminded that each of us are brought into this journey by Jesus, whose first action, if you recall, was to bring companions along with him. And together as congregations, you walk with one another, and you walk together in synod regions. And then we are connected with the churchwide office, and through that office, we make a multitude of national and global communications. And there are so many amazing ministries that happen because we serve together as a connectional church body. Because of my time, I won't be able to talk about a lot of them, and it may feel like it's sort of fast and furious, to use a common phrase these days. But I will try and give you a real sense of how those ministries, those companionships, those partnerships really do link in and work at many levels between the congregations, the church-wide office, your synod, and so forth. As you've heard, I work in the church-wide office as the Director for Theological Ethics. And in that capacity, I have responsibility for the development of ELC social teaching, which includes social statements, social messages, and social policy resolutions, and the particular responsibility for nurturing moral discernment. And I'll mention two opportunities near the end of my talk in which you can participate in all of this. But for now, I want to acknowledge that what Bishop Dunlap already said, he sort of stole my thunder. But I consider it a real privilege to work with him on the corporate social responsibility team, which attends both to using our voice to encourage corporations and to making sure that our church's investments are consistent with our values. And when I say it's a privilege to work with him, I say that genuinely because of his spirit and because of the insight he brings, given his background, to that table. And I just want to say thank you for inviting me to this assembly, Bishop Dunlap. I'm going to structure my report around the 6 synod emphases, which he lifted up earlier, because it's very easy to draw direct lines from them to the work of the churchwide office. And I hope you will come to see how churchwide also emphasizes efforts through these 6 themes, providing support for them in synods like yours, and doing the things that synods and congregations can't do as well alone, like managing global connections, speaking as a denomination, and the like. I'm going to begin with the one that's highlighted here, our shared efforts to care for congregations. Now, the first thing I have to say is that we know how just being a congregation over the last couple of years has been as hard as it has ever been in living memory. My wife is an interim pastor now serving her second congregation. And I know personally about the painful disagreements around masks, online worship, vaccines, and more. And I know how she and you have had to reinvent worship, education, service, justice work, use of your building, reinvent sometimes weekly, and the exhaustion that that brings. And I know that even now, as things are better, there is still so much uncertainty. So as I said, it's the hardest ever in living memory to be congregations. And yet I suspect you can, like I, can point to stories of God's faithfulness through it all. More than that, there's hard evidence. Despite the plague of COVID, ELCA COVID appeal funds came in and went out in millions to congregations, helping them keep hunger ministries going, helping them in a myriad of ways to keep other kinds of ministries going. And there are signs of God's faithfulness that are still very clear. In this lower Susquehanna Synod, there are 3 new starts, started just before the pandemic and still serving as sites of word and sacrament ministry. Across the whole ELCA, there are some over 400 ministries under development. Over half of those are ethnic, multicultural ministry, but there's more ways in which congregational care happens. The Congregations Lead Initiative is a new 2-year church-wide program that gathered a cohort of 48 congregations from across the church who want to programmatically unleash and harness their collective genius and discover new and useful ministry innovations. 2 of those are in Lower Susquehanna. You see them up on the screen there. St. Stephen with Pastor Matthew Best. And I have to give a shout out to him because he serves on the advisory council to the Journal of Lutheran Ethics, published out of my office. And St. Paul, Pastor Angela Hammer. The next theme of this synod and of our wider church that we share in common has to do with preparing and sustaining leaders. And you know that's always a partnership of local, synod, and church-wide. It begins in your congregations. I ask you, who are you praying for and encouraging to become lay or rostered leaders in our church? At the church-wide office, there are growing amounts of funds to provide for our church's future. 2 young leaders from your synod are being supported as they attend seminary, preparing for the office of word and sacrament. And walking together in this way, we make possible lifting up young leaders and supporting their time in seminary. So that, but there also are ways that we share leadership even now. Couple of examples. Church-wide funds make the ministry of the Director of Evangelical Mission possible, Pastor Jorgensen Jr. And I understand that he's been doing that for 8 years. Bravo. You also share your leaders, Stephen Herr and Mark Hoffman, as listed here on the slide. And of course, when it comes to sustaining leaders, one of the great events is the rostered ministers gathering, canceled due to COVID, but now scheduled for the summer of 2023 in Phoenix. For a day-to-day support, you might want to check out Courageous Leaders, ELCA coaching. It's a free online weekly gathering for faith leaders to encourage each other, to walk away with at least one practical nugget of wisdom every week, and to make wider connections. These kinds of things are only possible because the dollars for these programs, these initiatives, these sponsorships that I've been describing and that I will describe the rest of my report come from you and other ELCA members. Each member's financial offering is stewarded by your congregation's council to support the work of your local congregation. But in turn, your congregation designates a portion of offering to be shared with the synod, and in turn, a portion of that goes to the church-wide organization. So these funds, as you may know, are called mission support. $40.6 million were received in mission support and spent in 2021. And I think it's really important to pay close attention to the percentages. So 41% of that money that came in went toward domestic ministries in the United States, and a portion of which supported the congregational leadership efforts that I've been highlighting. 22% went to global ministries, and then 37% was used for developing current and future leaders. So it is this journey together, shared through dollars as well as through people resources and time and energy, that help mark our church as a church that is connectional, unlike some other churches, and a church that journeys together with Jesus. Fostering spiritual wellness is a little harder to quantify at the church-wide level, but let me lift up one prime example of your mission support dollars at work under this heading. Despite COVID, the newest church-wide resource for worship renewal was finished and released, All Creation Sings. It goes hand in hand with the ELW, but it invites us to expand prayer and song. It provides 2 new settings of Holy Communion, a service of word and prayer that's designed especially for contemplative worship. There are 75 prayers and liturgical forms, approximately 200 hymns and songs, many of them created over the last 15 years. Interacting authentically is one of those also less tangible kinds of emphases, but I like the way that your synod mission describes it. We practice gospel-centered hospitality, meeting people where they are, recognizing all created in God's image, and celebrate the richness in community by encouraging genuine, loving, Christ-like relationships. And as I thought about that, I thought, well, yeah, one of the richest community experiences is our youth gathering, our ELC youth gathering, and it had to be canceled because of COVID. The next one is scheduled for 2024, and the site was recently announced to be a favorite place that the gathering has been a number of times, going back to New Orleans. One of the other ways that I think we are authentic is how we do disaster relief. And it may seem odd to put disaster relief here, but the staff people at the church-wide office that I know like to talk about how we do our relief with a kind of Lutheran style. It's a way of interacting authentic to our values. What they are often told on site is that Lutherans have a reputation for rolling up their sleeves, showing up, and here's the key, and then they stay around. They don't show up for the media and then disappear. They're in it for the long haul. And I think that's a program to be proud of because of the way that we do that program. And the great news is that the ELCA members' generosity made 14,500,000 in contributions available last year. And so we were able to be present and to stick around in scores of different places. Building global relationships. Bishop Dunlap mentioned your synod's special relationship with the Kandy Diocese, and I liked how he emphasized how it's a rich relationship, a two-way street. I was impressed by the number of people who are who receive mission sponsorship through your synod and through the rest of the church as well. 4 of those, the first 4 sets, are in Tanzania. And then I noted that Pastor Jeffrey Truscott is in Singapore. And I just learned tonight about the new mission efforts to send a couple to Guatemala. So it's clear that this is an important connection that your synod emphasizes. And lots of people don't think about World Hunger Dollars as building global relationships, but they do. And I'm happy to report that in 2021, we had a record-breaking year, receiving nearly $23 million, more than had been expected. And that generosity made hunger efforts possible here within the United States and across the seas, and in terms of our global relationships. So there's a kind of joy that you can see reflected here, and it's about not just feeding people, but helping people develop and be able to feed themselves and to be educated. It's made possible all kinds of global relationships and connections. But it's also, as I mentioned earlier, it's domestic. It's a two-way street. These congregations listed here, as well as New Hope, have received grants to respond to domestic hunger needs and to big dreams. All of this happening through your generosity and the generosity of others across our church. We are all keenly aware of the continued fighting in the Ukraine and the 8 million refugees that has created. I want you to remember the 8 million refugees and the fact that just today I learned that the ELCA appeal has received $8.9 million for the Eastern European humanitarian crisis. And much of this aid is flowing through the Lutheran World Relief to Lutheran churches on the ground in Hungary and Poland who have refugees in their towns, their churches, their homes. And this work is being done, of course, not just alone, but connected with other humanitarian organizations to provide impact and solutions. And our companion journey is allowing us to reach out in this way. We journey together as an ELCA with an emphasis this year church-wide to embody the word. And that's the theme of Presiding Bishop Eaton's video. So I'll invite that to be played right now and invite you to take a look.
Martin Luther once said, "I felt that I had been born anew and that the gates of heaven had been opened. The whole of Scripture gained a new meaning, and from that point on the phrase, 'the justice of God,' no longer filled me with hatred, but rather became unspeakably sweet by virtue of a great love." Luther had been studying the Bible, St. Paul's letter to the Romans to be exact, when he finally came to understand that it was not up to human beings to make themselves worthy in the eyes of a righteous God. Luther tried. He quit his study of law. He entered a monastery and was so rigorously observant that his health suffered. The word of God only seemed to bring condemnation. It tormented him. But in an instant, that all changed. from hatred to love, from despair to joy, from death to life. Here was the gospel, the good news. We receive forgiveness of sin and become righteous before God out of grace for Christ's sake through faith. Luther knew he had to get the word out, literally. He laid hold of technology, the printing press, and modernized communication, translating the Bible into the vernacular. Ordinary people could now read or at least hear God's promise of love, freedom, and grace. Scripture was no longer the property of the educated elite. God's saving message could speak to all people. In a way, Luther's translation of the Bible, completed 500 years ago this year, combined with the technology of his day, made it possible to tell the old story in a new way. The gospel has not changed. The world has. The ELCA is rooted in tradition, the saving love of God given as a gift, grace. But we must become radically relevant. People today might not use the vocabulary of the church, sin or redemption or grace, but people are still looking for meaning and belonging and love. We need to take a page out of Luther's playbook and translate the gospel into the cultural vernacular. We're moving toward future church, and we have a goal to engage 1 million new, young, diverse people by the end of this decade, not to fill pews and offering plates, but to welcome them into the way of Jesus, where they and we find community, justice, and love. If we have experienced the infinite and intimate love of Jesus, why wouldn't we want to share that with everyone? We pray that the Holy Spirit would activate each of us for this life-giving work. We can tell the old story in a new way.
I did.
Roger, you're still muted from coming back from the video.
Thank you. And I want to make sure, is my screen also shared, the slides?
Roger, we're just seeing you at this moment.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you and I can see you, but I can't see the slides.
Okay, I think maybe they took away my screen sharing in order to do the video.
Right.
I think the program just does that.
There, we're coming back. There we have the slides. Thank you.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks for your patience.
No problem.
So I just think it's really thoughtful looking back to technological innovations that made the Reformation possible and thinking about how we must adapt to technology without losing the human touch or the core of the word promised to us today. And that theme, embody the word, permeates our year as a churchwide organization and the 2022 Churchwide Assembly, which will be held in Columbus, Ohio this August. The last theme here is growing justice and outreach initiatives. It's last but not least as a gift that we are given, that we can participate in what God is doing in society. God has clearly a concern for neighbor justice that shot through all of Scripture. And I can't speak to all the efforts that are happening at the churchwide office or in your synod because of time, but if you'll forgive me, I do want to highlight some of the work that I do related to this. I want to highlight two opportunities from the social teaching aspect of growing justice that you can participate in. We have underway a social statement on civics and faith, probing for our common convictions around government and faith vocation in this world that that was initiated by the 2019 Churchwide Assembly. And that task force has been at work through all of COVID. Only a month ago did we have our first in-person meeting. But through all that, they've been trying to listen to members across the church, to learn from specialists. And here's the key thing. They're going to be publishing a study curriculum this next November for use in congregations, campus ministries, youth groups, etc. And it is a key opportunity for you to participate in thinking about civics and faith from a Lutheran perspective, and a chance for you to share your response to the ideas that are in the study. So watch for it this fall, use it, and share your responses so the task force can take those into account as it moves into the phase. A year from this November, there will be a draft of a social statement. But a more immediate opportunity is to think about social questions has just recently been released. It's now available on the ELCA webpage. It's the study guide to the 2019 social statement on faith, sexism, and justice, a call to action. So there's something that you could take up this summer and something to watch for this fall. Well, I promised Fast and Furious. I think you'll see why. I did make it, and I do thank you for your attention, but most of all for being on this journey as companions with me and roughly 3.1 million other ELCA members and the millions more whom our ministry touches for Christ across the globe. Bishop Dunlap, this concludes the churchwide report on this journey with Jesus, and I turn it back to you.
Roger, thank you so much for being with us and taking time and customizing your presentation to the priorities that we have in our synod. And at this point, if you and I were in person, I would walk across the stage and shake your hand and present you with a gift. However, it's not possible to do that, but I do have the gift for you, and it's a leather-bound journal with the symbol of the Lower Susquehanna Synod, and we'll make sure that we get that to you. So,
I'm delighted and I'm grateful. I use those, and I will remember the handshake we didn't have, but look forward to the ones that we will have in the future.
all right. Well, thank you so much for your time. At this point, we're going to move on to the regular business that we have, and we are moving now to the report of the nominating committee, and I'm going to call on Vice President Jennifer Lau to give the report of the nominating committee.
Thank you, Bishop. Normally, when we gather in person, we would call on Kay Hinkle of our Synod Council, who is chair of the nominating committee, to present this report. For simplicity's sake, I'm representing her at this digital assembly. The report of the nominating committee is found on page 601 and many pages following that in the Bulletin of Reports. This year, we are electing members of the Synod Council and a board member for Susquehanna University. For the election to Synod Council, we have added a slate to include lay persons of any gender. This will help us to follow the Constitution that requires at least 45% women and at least 45% men on our Synod Council. The first slate, class of 2025 Synod Council ordained minister, and you will vote for no more than two. The Reverend Deanne Books, the Reverend Angela Hammer, the Reverend Gretchen Irian, the Reverend Karen Larson, the Reverend Elizabeth Polanski, and the Reverend Ben W. Siebert.
At this point, these nominees come from the nominating committee, and they are nominated for the position of ordained minister on the Synod Council. When we vote tomorrow, you'll vote for two of these 6 candidates, However, I would ask at this moment if there are any nominees from the floor, meaning if anyone wants to nominate. I would remind you of Rule 24 that you adopted a little while ago that says you must have the person's permission before you nominate them. So if you have someone's permission and you would like to nominate someone, then please use the raise the hand function. And you could nominate an ordained minister to the Synod Council. And then you'll want to send your name to the moderator by chatting and just putting your name and congregation in there. Are there any additional nominees for ordained minister to Synod Council? I am not seeing any indication that one's going to be nominated, so I'm going to close the nominations and ask Jennifer to move to the next category.
The next slate is the class of 2025 Synod Council lay woman, and you will vote for no more than one. They are Deborah K. Barrett and Jennifer DiStefano.
So we have these two nominated as lay women for Synod Council. If you have an additional nomination, we are open to hear that. You would need to raise your hand and then indicate to the moderator that you would want to speak, and we will call upon you. I'm not getting any indication of raising hands. So I will close the nominations for lay woman for Synod Council and move to the next category. Vice President Lau, go ahead.
Class of 2025 Synod Council lay man. You will vote for no more than one. Barry L. Boyer, Evan P. Williams.
We have these two gentlemen nominated for Synod Council from the nominating committee. Are there any additional nominations from the floor? If you have a nomination, you would want to use the raise hand function and then send a note to the moderator. We're not seeing any raised hands, so I will close the nominations for lay man for Synod Council, and we will move to the next category.
The next category is class of 2025 for Synod Council, a lay person of any gender. You will vote for no more than one. Chuck Bissell or Andrea Lindgren Oslakova.
So we have two nominees for lay of any gender. Are there any additional nominees in this category? If you would want to nominate someone, you would certainly have to have their permission, and then you would raise your hand. And we're seeing no raised hands, so I am going to close this category and move to the next one.
The next category is class of 2025 Synod Council young adult. Vote for no more than one. Haley McCoy or Rachel Norris.
So we have two nominees for Synod Council of young adult. Are there any additional nominations? If there are, you would want to raise your hand and then go ahead and message the moderator so that we would know there is an additional nomination. We are not seeing any, so I'm going to close this nomination category and we'll move to the final nominees.
Okay, the final category is a Susquehanna University board member, and you will vote for no more than one. The Reverend Sean M. Berkebile, the Reverend Sandra Gideon.
So Susquehanna University allows us to elect someone to the board of the university. And so we have two nominees for that position. Are there any additional nominations from the floor to serve on the board of Susquehanna University? If there were, you would need to raise your hand by using the raise the hand function and then message the moderator. We are not seeing any raised hands, so I'm going to close the nominations for Susquehanna University board member. That is the last of the nominees. I would highly recommend that if you have not read the biographical information of the nominees to inform your voting, then I would want you to do that before tomorrow morning when we have the elections. You will find the report of the nominations on page 601 and following, and all of the candidates' biographical information is there. And it would probably speed our process tomorrow morning if you would go through and mark who you're going to vote for before we get to that moment, so that when we get there, you're ready to go. And I want to thank the members of the nominating committee. Kay Hinkle is the chair of that committee, and all of the members of that committee are listed again in the Who's Who section, and you can certainly check that if you would like to. At this point, I would just want to inform you that we do have assembly committees that serve during the time of the assembly to help with the work of the assembly. They are also listed in the Who's Who. There is an election committee, which is chaired by the Reverend Jillian Riddle, who is in the next room running VVOX for me. And then we have a memorials committee, and it is chaired by the Reverend Stephen R. Herr, and we'll get a report from the memorials committee tomorrow. They have memorials for us to consider to take to churchwide. We also have a committee of reference and council, which is chaired by the Reverend Hans E. Becklin. At this moment, we are not aware of any resolutions, but certainly there could be resolutions or business that come before the assembly, and we will certainly then use that committee in that situation. And then serving also for the assembly is a worship committee. It is chaired by the Reverend Sean Titus, and we give thanks for their work as well. So I want to thank all the members of the people who serve on these committees to help make the assembly work. At this point, we have arrived in the agenda where we are going to have the reports of the bishop and the officers. These reports are found on page 201 to 505. So I'll just make some brief comments at this time. If you have questions for me or the officers of the synod, please feel free to put them in the chat with the moderator and they'll be relayed to me.
It's fantastic. No, I don't.
Okay. So if you have questions for me or the officers, please put them in the chat and the moderator will get them to me. Some things that I would want to highlight that have happened for us in the last year is we have moved offices. So we were for 53 years in the same offices in Harrisburg. And last August, we moved our offices to 1959 Market Street in Camp Hill. And in fact, that's where I'm located right at the moment in 1959 Market Street. You'll see in my report that we ordained 5 new leaders since our last assembly: Elizabeth Ekman, Taylor Burdahl, Andrew Burdahl, Scott Brubaker, and Margaret Fulcomer Leonard, who is serving as our chaplain. An interesting note is that 4 of the 5 of these ordinands are part of a clergy couple. In fact, in our synod, we have 33 clergy couples, which means 66 of our rostered leaders are married to other rostered leaders on our roster. Included in my report was also recognition of significant anniversaries of the ordinations of rostered leaders, and I give thanks for the service of these leaders to the life of the church. Many of these leaders will be recognized in their congregations, but since the synod staff is in a different congregation each Sunday, sometimes their ordination anniversaries can go unnoticed. So I just want to take a moment to recognize Pastor Beth Martini, one of my assistants who celebrates 10 years of ordained ministry this year on August the 3rd. So congratulations, Beth. And Beth is around the corner here monitoring some aspect of our production. But when you see her, offer your appreciation and congratulations. And thank you, Beth, for all your great work. I am really thankful for the work of the officers of the synod. Jennifer Lau, as vice president, oversees the meetings of our synod council and sits with our staff in many of our meetings to be familiar with all the workings of Synod ministries. She works with a network of vice presidents across the ELCA. And in addition, this year, Jen is representing the ELCA at the Lutheran World Federation Symposium for Lay Leaders that is happening virtually with Lutheran leaders from around the world. And so we give thanks for her service in that way. Our secretary, Pastor Beth Schlegel, records the minutes of all the proceedings of the Synod, reviews all the constitutional changes for the Synod and the congregation, serves on many Synod committees, and is involved in our mission planning, and serves as pastor to 2 different congregations in our Synod in 2 different conferences. And quite honestly, I am not certain how she accomplishes all that she does do, but we are blessed with her leadership. Our treasurer, Joe Stepansky, oversees the financial management of our Synod, and his masterful reporting and attention to detail has allowed us to manage a very tight budget and still meet all of our financial objectives. The auditors have given us an unqualified opinion for our 2021 fiscal year, which ended in January of this year. And it's a testament to the fine work that's done in the treasurer's office by Kathy Paul and Denise Ferguson under Joe's leadership. Joe's reports show the current financial state of the Synod, and he will bring the 2023 budget to the floor of the Assembly tomorrow, or to the camera of the Assembly tomorrow, depending on how we talk about this. The proposed budget will be found on page 107 of your bulletin of reports. And if you would like to propose a change to the budget, we would want that to be in writing before 8:15 tomorrow morning. Any motions would need to be mailed to the secretary before 8:15. Please refer to Rule 17. You've got to be impressed. I know these rules by number. So are there any questions for the officers of the Synod? If you don't ask questions, I go to jokes. You know, Oh, I was to remind you that you were to raise your hand. Well, then let me tell you about a woman who recently moved into the Synod. Her name is Gladys Dunn. And Gladys is an older woman and is retired in the area, and decided on a Sunday morning it was beautiful that she would walk down to the church not far from her apartment. And she admired the beautiful building and the wonderful stained glass windows, and she stepped into the worship service. But Gladys was not too impressed with the sermon. She thought it was kind of boring, and it felt like it went on forever and ever and ever. She looked around the church and she noticed that a few of the members of the congregation were kind of nodding off. Well, the preacher finally finished the sermon, and he encouraged the congregation to greet one another at the passing of the peace. And so, you know, they were to greet people that were near them, of course, with proper social distancing. But anyway, Gladys turned to the man that was sitting on her left, and he too, she noticed, had fallen asleep in the sermon and was now kind of yawning and almost stretching to get awake. And he smiled at Gladys, and she said politely, "I'm Gladys Dunn." And he said, "Me too. That was terrible, wasn't it?" Are there any questions for the officers? All right, then we'll move on to the reports of committees, agencies, institutions, and Synod units. These reports are found on pages 901 to pages 1401. The reports of the committees and task force of the Synod, as well as the program staff of the Synod, are found on pages 901 to 200 through 1212. It would be a joy. It would be a joy to share each of these reports in detail with you, so that you could understand the scope and reach of the ministry we share. But sadly, there is not time. And so you receive the reports in a written form. But I would encourage you to take a look. And I give thanks for the people who take the time and participate in this work. Please take a look at the Hunger Committee's report on page 1212. They distributed hunger grants to 12 of our congregations so that they could feed the hungry in the synod, and they distributed over $76,000 to congregations to help feed hungry in our synod. Please take a look at page 1205 in the report of the Condi Committee, which also reports the important work that Deacon April Trout is doing on the ground in the Condi Diocese on our behalf. And as the world opens up from COVID and we're able to travel back to the Condi Diocese, April will be there to guide and lead us and host us. In the meantime, she is arriving back in the United States, and I think she's back in the country right now. And so we're grateful for her work. You'll also note the report of the Lower Susquehanna Mission Committee, which distributed $60,000 into 5 of our congregations to expand mission and ministry in our synod. The Justice Ministry report is on page 1203 and explains the activities that we have been doing around immigration, affordable housing, homelessness, disability ministry, racial justice, and LGBTQIA affirming ministries. If there are questions on these reports, please feel free to raise your hand and send those questions to the moderator. On page 1301 to 1401, there are reports from independent ministries and partner ministries of our synod. Our reach is well beyond what we do here in the Lower Susquehanna Synod. The work of our camps, our advocacy ministry across Pennsylvania, campus ministries, our social service agencies, and our global partners in Condi and Tree for Hope in Guatemala are outlined in these reports. One of our partners is Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services. They have been doing this work for decades and decades, since the end of World War II. But they've had a particularly busy time with refugees now from Afghanistan and Ukraine. And I'd like to take a moment to share a brief video from LIRS. If you have any questions of any of our committees or partners, please raise your hand and put them in the chat while the video is playing, and we'll attempt to answer them when we come back. If we could go ahead with that video from Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services.
All of the craziness of our lives and the things that we think define who we are stop us from seeing who God calls us. You know, that God calls us beloved, that we're loved and held and, you know, embraced by God, even though we're like messed up in so many ways. And just taking that one step, just crossing over that river and getting over that fear and saying, I'm going to go into this and see what God is calling me into.
Even as I've come into LIRS today to see what the outpouring of goods and things are from congregations just in this area, I know that across this country, we're now in a situation of also showing that same hospitality to Afghan refugees. I really hope that every congregation would consider this and expect great returns on the sense of loving the neighbor, receiving the refugee and the stranger, and watching these people contribute to life in this country.
I love the environment here. You know, with all the struggles when I came first in the United States, resettlement process, even for me, because I knew the language, was not easy. You know, the test of freedom, safety, and security hit us differently.
We are glad to be doing this ministry in partnership with LIRS, but we wish we didn't have to. And I want to acknowledge that we grieve with people who have left everything. We grieve with those of you who see your country, your homeland still in such peril. Our hearts are with you, our prayers remain with you, and we are committed to doing all we can to ensure that you and your people have a future with hope.
We give thanks for the ministry of LIRS and all they are doing to work with those who have been displaced from their homelands, mostly because of war and violence, and bringing them here to safety and to security. And we give thanks for their ministry. I know a number of our congregations and groups of congregations have been working with LRIS and other organizations to bring refugees and find homes for them in our area. And it's a gracious and wonderful ministry, and we give thanks. At this point, I have not received any questions. And so this really wraps up our business for this evening. So I'm going to call on Deacon Margaret Fulcomer Leonard, our Assembly chaplain, to close us with evening devotions. Meg, you ready?
Yes, I'm just noticing the lights giving me a little bit of a halo behind me. All right.
Lights.
Oh my. All right. So I invite us to end this first session, this first day of Synod Assembly, with a beautiful and powerful hymn and prayer by renowned gospel singer, musician, and composer Doris Akers, the late Doris Akers. So let its words remind us that we do not journey alone, but are accompanied by God, Christ Jesus, and the Holy Spirit, 3 in 1. And I actually invite you all to stay muted, but please do join me. I put the refrain into the chat. So if you would like to join me in singing, you are most welcome. If you have a hymnal nearby, it is ELW 768. But the refrain is easily picked up. Text is lead me, guide me along the way. For if you lead me, I cannot stray. Lord, let me walk each day with thee. Lead me, O Lord, lead me. Lead me, guide me along the way. For if you lead me, I cannot stray. Lord, let me walk each day with thee. Lead me, O Lord, lead me. I am weak and I need thy strength and power to help me over my weakest hour. Help me through the darkness, thy face to see. Lead me, oh Lord, lead me. Lead me, guide me along the way. For if you lead me, I cannot stray. Lord, let me walk each day with thee. Lead me, oh Lord, lead me. Help me tread in the path of righteousness. Be my aid when Satan and sin oppress. I am putting all my trust in thee. Lead me, oh Lord, lead me. Lead me, guide me along the way. servant be. Lead me, oh Lord, lead me. Lead me, guide me along the way. For if you lead me, I cannot stray. Lord, let me walk each day with thee. Lead me, oh Lord, lead me. The psalmist writes in Psalm 4, answer me when I call, O God, defender of my cause. You set me free when I was in distress. Have mercy on me and hear my prayer. And in Psalm 5, lead me, Lord, in your righteousness because of those who lie in wait for me. Make your way straight before me. May we end tonight's session confident in the knowledge that God hears our fervent prayers for gracious guidance and merciful aid, and continues to lead us on the journey. Let us close now with one of the traditional prayers of the service of night prayer or Compline. Let us pray. Keep watch, dear Lord, with those who work or watch or weep this night, and give your angels charge over those who sleep. Tend the sick, give rest to the weary, bless the dying, soothe the suffering, comfort the afflicted, shield the joyous, and all for your love's sake. Amen.
Thank you so much. We are in recess until 8:15 tomorrow morning, June the 4th. Please log into the meeting early and then get your coffee. You should have your information sheet, and the Zoom meeting information is the same as it was for this session. I would just remind you that if you want to submit a proposal to change the budget, we would need to have that before 8:15 tomorrow morning, according to Rule 17. So all submissions would be made to bschlegel@lss-elca.org. That's it for tonight. Good night, and thank you for your attention. And we look forward to seeing you tomorrow morning at 8:15. We are in recess.